What is up, everybody? We are one more month down in the year of 2024. July was actually a pretty damn good month of movies. So I have 9 new releases that I was able to check out. A number of them are from Fantastic Fest last year, as well as one film that premiered at the Overlook Film Festival a few months ago, but I actually just watched it for the first time a couple of weeks ago. But this is one of those rare moments. Might be the only month this year so far. Somebody will have to fact check me on that, where all of these movies I would give a positive review for. I didn't have a bad experience with any of them. So even the movies that are in my bottom 2 or 3, I gave a thumbs up to. So 9 new releases from the month of July 2024, ranked worst to best. Let's get into it. And starting off at number 9 is a film that I saw last September at Fantastic Fest, and that is going to be Kill. And again, I did like this movie, but I also find myself to very much be in the minority with it, because this is a movie that has been getting a ton of acclaim, both last year at the actual festival, as well as now that people are able to actually check the movie out in theaters, as like the greatest action movie of 2024 by a landslide. And I just didn't have that experience with it. Part of it is absolutely just some festival fatigue that I had at the time, both just physically, as well as there was about 4 other movies that I watched last year at this festival that were kind of going for the same thing, a certain country's version of Die Hard. And that's very much what Kill is. It's like Die Hard on a train. It's not exactly one for one, but it's definitely going for that type of experience. And to me, the main thing that stood out about it is just the level of ultra violence. And that's really what a lot of people are taking away from it as the thing that they love the most about it. And it's certainly hyper violent. It was funny. It was hyped up so much by people that got to see it at its first screening last year at Fantastic Fest that me and Sean were starting to take notice, like, what is this movie? What does this movie do that everybody's freaking out about it? And so we got tickets to the second screening of it a few days later, walked into it, and for like the first hour or so of the movie, it's like, okay, it's a little violent and there's some things going on, but like, I don't get it. I'm missing what everybody else has been talking about. And about an hour or so into the movie, suddenly something happens with the plot, and then boom, the title card Kill comes up, and you're like, oh, now he's about to fuck people up. And so it was a very interesting experience for that, because I was kind of like almost falling asleep for the first hour, because I'm just like, oh man, I'm not really getting into these characters. Like, yeah, it's got some violence here and there, but like it's a plot that I've seen before in various forms. And then all of a sudden, boom, that comes up, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm awake. And then woo, then the last hour or so of the movie is just a ton of violence, a ton of kills, a ton of blood and gore. And so it's definitely worth checking out if you like those types of movies. But that was really the only positive appeal that I got out of it. Was like, yeah, it was hyper violent. Didn't really get into the characters much. Didn't really get into the story because it's derivative. I can't really even tell you anything. Granted, it's been months, but I can't really tell you anything about the main character or the main villain. And that's really what makes movies like this stand out for me, is who's your John McClane replacement and who's your Hans Gruber replacement. And I just didn't think there was much standout about those characters. So again, I liked it, just not on the train of this movie being the greatest action experience of the year, or even last year when I first saw it. Coming in at number 8 is going to be another film from last year's Fantastic Fest, and that is going to be Crumb Catcher. Now, I don't know how wide, I don't know where you could find the release of this film, because it's certainly going to be a limited release in theaters, or if it's on VOD, it's going to be one that's probably going to be a little difficult to track down at first, but it did get its release this month, and Crumb Catcher was one of the most interesting movies that I saw last year. It's going for this psychological thriller, dark comedy, a bunch of other things kind of mixed in. Essentially, you had this couple that get married, and there's already like a tension in the marriage on day one, and they go off to this little remote house for their honeymoon, and this really awkward guy that was working their wedding follows them there. And very quickly it turns from him, while still being awkward, trying to just do like a good deed. I can't remember, they like forgot something or he brought something to them. And it immediately switches into him giving this really awkward, quirky, and somewhat uncomfortable sales pitch. Like he's an inventor, he's an entrepreneur, and things just devolve from there. Like it's a very offbeat movie. Even the performance of the villain, like it's the best part of the movie, but it's very multi-layered. It's part creepy, part uncomfortable, part funny. And so it was one of those movies that I didn't know anything about it walking into it. Even the title, I'm like, what the Crumb Catcher? What the fuck is that? And even after seeing the movie, it's kind of hard to describe exactly the experience they're going for, but it was memorable and it was interesting. The only thing that held it back for me that I remember is that I didn't really love the way that the movie wrapped up. It kind of felt a little sudden and didn't quite pay off the character arcs of the main two characters, the protagonists, in the way that I would have enjoyed more. So that held it back a bit, but it is a movie to put on your radar for certain. If you like movies that are a little quirky, a little offbeat, and certainly different, this one was different. Coming in at number 7, we have Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. And this was a movie that I think everybody, even the most optimistic of all of us, everybody expected to not be very good. Just because of the track record and the trajectory of the Beverly Hills Cop franchise back in the 80s and 90s, the amount of false attempts and false starts that some form of follow-up to Beverly Hills Cop 3 has gone on through for over the last 20 years. I mean, it was supposed to be a movie with him and his son, and then that got turned into a TV show. Then the TV pilot was shot, and then it was rejected and never picked up. And then it just felt like one of those movies that was cursed, was never going to happen, and probably for the best. And then we got Netflix picking it up and saying, we're finally doing it. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed this. I still don't think that it's like awesome, and it's even more so the way that it's kind of fall down to the lower part of this list is more so because even though I enjoyed it, it's not a movie that stuck with me at all. But they recaptured more than I expected them to about the classic Beverly Hills Cop experience. I think that it's the most classic Eddie Murphy that we've gotten in a very long time, which I crave a full-on resurgence from that guy. I think that he did a really good job of kind of getting back into the cadence of Axel Foley. And so that was the most enjoyable part. The action is definitely is the most, big budget and most over the top of the 4 movies, but it was very serviceable. We're in an era where action is hard to impress because you have things like John Wick and, movies that are just blowing the doors off with fight choreography. And so you get something that's a little more old school like this, and it's just cops and robbers and shootouts and stuff. And it does a good job at still being very entertaining on the action side of things, even though we're mostly there for the comedy. It was very, very nice to see John Ashton especially back, but even Judge Reinhold, just the little bit that we get of those 3 characters was just like they were not missing a beat. Like we just went into production on Beverly Hills Cop 4 right after the first 2 movies. I wish we could have gotten more of it. That was something that kind of held the movie back a bit more for me too. They really advertised it as the 3 classic characters are back together. And you don't get a lot of that in the movie, but when you do get it, it's very good. Joseph Gordon-Levitt I enjoyed as well. The main issue I had with the film that held it back a lot in the second act of the film especially is that I just did not like Axel Foley's daughter. I think that they wrote her poorly. I think that the actress that they cast, I'm sure she's a fine actress, but it was not the right type of performance for Axel Foley's offspring. You had a version of this in Live Free or Die Hard with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, where she has this vendetta against her father. She has this issue with him where she rejects him, and John McClane's trying to get back into her good graces, and then this nefarious situation kind of forces them back together and mends their relationship. But the reason that worked, where you have a character that is talking down to and framing our hero that we're here to see the movie for as kind of a shitbag, it works because the journey that they go on feels like a necessary healing between them. And Mary Elizabeth Winstead has that ironic revelation halfway through the movie and all the way to the end where she's so much like her father and she has his exact same tendencies. And so it just worked on a chemistry level. Here it did not. You have this woman that, with the plot that they give you, with the info they give you, has every reason in the world to have an issue with her father. And he has every issue in the world, or every reason in the world, to feel guilty and regretful about it. But it just doesn't work as much with the character of Axel Foley, who's very jokey and very quippy and is always trying to find the comedic element in every situation. And you just have this character who is literally a wet blanket for an entire hour of the film where every time he's trying to be Axel Foley, she's just shutting him down and annoyed by him and frustrated by him and continuously repeats to the audience how much she dislikes her father and just won't give any room whatsoever for him to mend that relationship. And at no point in the film does she have any tendency to seem like an Axel Foley offspring. And that was what was missing for me. If after a while she started to behave like him or fast talk her way into a situation as a lawyer or whatever, and she realizes, oh, I'm more like him than I realized, like that's what was missing for me. So I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. I'm sure whenever I go to rewatch the franchise in a couple of years, it'll be a really fun time getting into that fourth film, but good, not amazing, is what it is. Number 6, you have Young Lion of the West, and this is my friend Joey Sasso's film, which I have dropped a review for it. I interviewed him at MegaCon for those of you that were live to see that or saw the video version that I posted on my channel earlier this year. And this is a film that has been in some form of production for over 12 years. It's literally Joey and his roommate, writing partner, friend, and the guy who directed the film, Josh, that had this idea, had this passion for making a movie, something that's kind of like a throwback to early Scorsese, like Mean Streets, and they got it done through hell and high water. You know, independently funded, independently shot and filmed. A lot of the movie's locations and everything, and cast and production was done through favors and friends and family, and it's just a really fascinating story for me, who knows a lot about the behind the scenes, what it took to get this thing made. And I think it's for what it is, which is a very independently made film. It cost $13,000 to make this movie. I think it's very good for what it is. It's a morality tale, somewhat in the classic vein of a lot of movies that we know and love in this subgenre, where you have a character that's morally compromised in a lot of ways, has this drive, has this passion for something, and you just watch him make all the wrong decisions and go down this path of defeat, basically. He has the rise and the fall, like most crime thrillers. And so it's just a really interesting movie to see what two young, passionate filmmakers will do when they don't get the studio backing, when they don't have anybody that's signing checks and helping them along the way. They just want to get it done, so they fucking get it done. So check it out on Amazon Prime. It is a movie that is available that you can buy and or rent and check out right now. Yeah, I enjoyed seeing the final product. I enjoyed seeing what Joey could do as an actor, as somebody who's known very well for his reality TV appearances and wins, and getting to see his creative side come out. And for somebody that likes a lot of the movies that this is very clearly influenced by, it was fun to see their own take on it, which follows the formula to a degree and then very much breaks the formula in a number of ways in its structure. So I enjoyed it. I encourage you to check it out if you want to see what a true independent film looks like. Coming in at number 5 is going to be Oddity. And this is a film that premiered at the Overlook Film Festival that I went to in New Orleans, but I did not get a chance to see it then. Sean went in to go see this while I went in to go see Arcadian with Nicolas Cage. And so I was able to grab a screener for this, thankfully, because there was no screenings anywhere near me. And this is a film that I would like to revisit because I had kind of an odd experience whenever I went to finally sit down and watch this. Sometimes for somebody that watches movies for a living and watches a lot of movies, sometimes you hit this exhaustion point where you go to sit down to watch something that you know is for work. It's not, there's always a bit of like, I'm sitting down to enjoy this, but there's also a part of your brain that always knows this is work. So I need to pay attention. I need to analyze. I need to mentally take notes. I need to look beyond the surface. And so sometimes you hit an exhaustion point when you do that so often where your brain just rejects it. It's like, dude, I am not fucking working right now. It's like the cinematic equivalent of eating too much, where your body just starts to go, dude, stop, we're full. And so I turned this movie on, and about 10 minutes into it, my brain just absolutely rejected the idea of watching a film that I was planning on reviewing. And so I found myself drifting off, not paying attention to it, and so I shut it off. And then later on in the night, tried it again, still had the same experience. I even texted my buddy Sean because I was talking with him, and I was like, Do you ever have this happen where like your brain just rejects the notion of reviewing something and you're not even able to engage at all with what's on screen? And he's like, yep, happens all the time. So it was good to know I wasn't the only one. But eventually I did go back to this film and tried my best to watch it and get through all of that, the exhaustion that I was having with watching movies. And it did affect my experience with the first third or so of the movie quite a bit, where it is a slow starter. It is a movie that it's not very clear exactly the directions that it's going. It introduces a lot of different things in the first act, where you have kind of this cold open where a woman has this really creepy dude knock on her door, and then all of a sudden you're introduced to her husband that you've never met, and then you're introduced to her sister who's a medium and is blind that has all these shop of oddities, and then they meet up at this house, and so you're just like, what is going on? And so I struggled in the first act trying to get kind of on pace with what the movie was trying to do. Then I started to enjoy kind of the way that they were intentionally trying to subvert the subgenre that this movie behaves like it is, where you have a situation where this sister, who is a blind medium with these really odd, creepy toys and trinkets, seems like this nefarious presence in this house and with the people she's surrounded by. And so the movie kind of makes you feel like it's going to be one of those, almost like a haunted house film where it's being haunted by somebody who's physically alive. And that's not the way that it goes. I'll just say that without having to spoil the movie. It goes in some very different directions and things are not what they seem. And I always enjoy a movie that can subvert my expectations and can set me up to think one thing and actually pay it off in a very different, unexpected way. So I ended up really enjoying this overall. And I do think it has some of the best scares of the year for sure. But that first act, as well as kind of some things about the way that the movie wraps up, held it back for me a bit, where it's not much higher than where I have it here. I do want to revisit it when I'm in a more present mood and when I'm in more of a mood to check this thing out. And maybe I won't struggle with the first act as much, or maybe I will. Maybe that's just legitimately how I'm going to view the movie. But I do recommend you check it out if it's playing near you, or if whenever it hits home video, you have a chance to see it, because it is a genuinely creepy movie that has some cool ideas. Coming in at number 4 is Twisters. And I got to be honest with you, I'm surprised how much I like this, because I've never been a massive fan of the original film. I like it, I don't dislike it, but it's never really been this big mainstay for me. I remember going to see it in theaters and thinking, oh, that's cool, and then seeing it at home and going, oh, without the big theater sound and the big screen, the movie's just okay. And so I was not really on the train of like, we need a new Twister movie, we need a sequel, or we need a reboot or whatever. And so when they started to advertise this, I was like, okay, I'm sure it'll be fine. And what I ended up really enjoying about this is that it's a very classic summer blockbuster where it's just trying to entertain you. And, you know, there's another movie on this list I'll get into later that has the same objective. And sometimes I just really need that type of movie. I need a type of movie that's not really trying to say much. It's not really having a whole lot under the surface. It's not a movie that you can really dissect below the surface level. It's just a film that introduces this concept, basically a disaster film, tornadoes, and people that are trying to study those tornadoes and the destruction of the tornadoes, and just going on a thrill ride of watching them have fun with the tornadoes and then very quickly turning on its head and having them basically running for their lives from tornadoes. And so I just had a really fun time with this one. It was a good night at the theaters. You have really charming and charismatic leads here. You have very effective and convincing CGI with the storms and the tornadoes and the things flying around and the explosions, you know, the disaster movie side of it. And I just had a good time. So if you want something that is just a good, classic, fun 2 hours at the movies, this one delivered for me, and I actually didn't expect it to deliver near as much as it did. So coming in at number 4 is Twisters. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Longlegs, the big, huge underdog surprise hit of the year. Certainly of the month. This is a movie that had some of the best marketing and advertising that I have seen in years, where they just kept building this intrigue and building this mystery and building this hype without telling you a whole lot. Like, all the posters that they were releasing are just these random shots of the movie. You had like videos where they were basically playing the heartbeat of Micah Monroe, the protagonist in the movie, when she first sees Nicolas Cage, who plays the antagonist of the movie, in his full makeup. A lot of things that, of course, is just a studio kind of peddling bullshit to try to bring hype up, but it fucking worked because this movie made a ton of money. And I remember when I saw this opening night, my theater was practically full, and I was like, dude, this is cool. This is awesome to see, because I never see a movie this full unless it's Marvel. So essentially you have Longlegs, where it was kind of being marketed, and a lot of the early reviews especially were just hyping it up as like scariest movie of the year. You know, this was that of 2024 so far, which you can always take to the bank. It's going to be bullshit. But what it actually is a throwback to 90s serial killer movies like Seven, Silence of the Lambs, Bone Collector, Kiss the Girls, things like that. It's very different, and it's a lot more satanic in nature than any of those films, and it certainly has twists and turns that make it very different than any of those. It's not a one-for-one comparison to any of them, but that's the best way to describe this movie, is a throwback to that era of movies that we don't really get too many of them nowadays, with Nicolas Cage as the serial killer, as the titular Longlegs. And what I really appreciated about this movie was it has this sense of unease, this sense of dread, this sense of discomfort that it elicits in you because of the camera lens choice, big wide angle lenses, and the way that they shoot most of the movie, where it's all static, it's all slow zooms. Every shot of the movie, for the most part, when you have a subject of the shot it's supposed to be the focus, they're in the direct center, and you have so much empty void space that as the movie continuously makes you more uncomfortable, you just find yourself like darting around to all of the empty space, waiting for something to pop out or somebody to walk out or something to jump out. And the movie just never really gives you the release. I kind of likened it in my review to when you know a jump scare is coming and you kind of grip your chair, like the music cuts out and somebody's walking through a dark hallway, and you know at some point something's going to jump out, a fucking cat, or something's going to fall, or the light's going to flicker and see something, and it just never happens. So you're just kind of stuck gripping your chair going, what the fuck? When's it going to happen? That's kind of the permanent state that you're in the entire film. So I would not personally call the film scary. I would just call it very uneasy and uncomfortable. And everybody has their own definition for what scary is. For some people, it's jump scares. For some people, it's tone. For some people, it is that uneasy tone and an uneasy feeling that it brings in them. So for some people, this is the scariest movie of the year, or a very scary film. It's not exactly how I define scary. So I just think it's a very uncomfortable movie in the best way. Micah Monroe, very interesting performance from her. Very different than what we've seen from her before, much more subdued and detached, and I liked what she was doing there. And then you have Nicolas Cage, which for the most part is exactly what I expected when they say Nicolas Cage is going to play a serial killer. And it's about 80% good and 20% bad that comes with that. I think that the way that he looks with the design of the character and the makeup and, of course, with his performance in that, it's a very uneasy character. It's very creepy and weird, and certainly a performance and a character that you kind of have to see. But there's also a couple of moments in the movie, two in particular, where I felt Nicolas Cage kind of compromised the character a little bit by going to stereotypical Nicolas Cage. There's a scene in a car where he's yelling, and there's a scene where he's singing that has since gone viral on TikTok and everything, where it kind of took me out of it a bit, where I was like, okay, that's Cage doing the Cageism. And I felt like the character was most effective when he was subdued, when he was, actually kind of drawing himself back a bit. And so those couple of moments I didn't love. So it wasn't a complete knockout of the park for me. But I did really enjoy this. I found that by the end of it, it's a movie that it leaves enough unanswered and enough mystery there that makes me immediately want to watch it again and see if there's enough in the film to kind of put the pieces in place to figure out some of the questions that you have, or if it's in fact just one of those movies that intentionally leaves pieces out of the puzzle box, which could either be a good or a bad thing in time. I kind of need to see how I sit with the film over time and with different watches. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. It was a nice little surprise for the year that luckily I was able to walk into completely blind, and I really dug it as a fan of those 90s serial killer movies that this was kind of born out of. Number 2 is going to be MaXXXine, and this was easily one of the most immediately divisive films of the year, which is always very interesting for me. And luckily for me, I ended up on the side that really liked this because I absolutely loved X, really enjoyed Pearl, and this was my most anticipated film of the year all the way up until its release. So I'm glad that I walked out happy and wasn't, unfortunately, one of the people that didn't have as good of a time with it. But this is very much a throwback to 80s Italian horror. It's also sending up the 80s in a way that's very unique, where it's not about the glam and the neon and the over-the-top nature of the 80s. It's kind of about some of the dirtiness of it. It's taking place during like the Satanic Panic era, where you had the government and a lot of other people that were taking issue with horror films, heavy metal music, things like that, and very much trying to take it away, where you had like the PMRC taking on heavy metal, and then Dee Snider kind of coming in as the one defense. And that's kind of the part of the movie that I feel like a lot of people have missed a bit. I'm not really one to say you didn't get it for those that didn't like it, but I've seen a lot of people take issue with the final act of the film and what ultimately is revealed. And to me, it fits very much in line with the era that this movie is set in 1985, where you have that Satanic Panic very much as the thing that defined that little bit in the 80s, where that's, movies like Friday the 13th were getting hacked left and right by the MPAA, and heavy metal was getting criticized left and right and being satanic and devil worshiping, when none of it almost had anything to do with that. And when you have the third act of this film and what it ultimately means for MaXXXine, to me, it fits very much into being kind of a commentary on how horror films and heavy metal rose above all of that and reigned victorious, where even in the case of heavy metal, technically the PMRC won by forcing them to put parental advisory on all of the CDs. And all that did was extrapolate the success of heavy metal at the time. Suddenly, the CDs that had parental advisory on it were selling more than the ones that didn't. And so I very much likened the movie as kind of a commentary on that. And so I really enjoyed it for that. Beyond all of that, though, I just found it to be a very stylistic movie that was entertaining. I liked the characters, especially Kevin Bacon. I thought he stole the show here. There's some really twisted kills in this. Not a ton of them. It's not a movie that's a kill a minute. It's not nearly as even as much as there was an X. But the ones that we get are pretty gross. The practical effects are really good. And, the one thing that I'll agree with everybody that was a bit of a bummer is that it's set up to be a whodunit. A serial killer's running around and killing people and targeting MaXXXine, and there's supposed to be this mysterious element and this detective journey you go on as a viewer to figure out who it is. And for me, even before I walked into the film, had a good idea of who it was going to be. And then, especially in some things that are shown in the beginning of the film, it's like, okay, well, obviously that's the direction they're going then. So it would have been nice to have a bit more of a surprise in the third act and not be so obvious. But even with it being obvious, as I was saying earlier, I like what all of that meant, at least to me, how I read it, how I interpreted it. So really enjoyed this film. To me, it's my second favorite of the X trilogy. It's my second favorite horror film of the year thus far. And we still got some heavy hitters coming out. So might be actually a pretty damn good year for horror that started off kind of shitty. So I dug MaXXXine. Sorry for everybody that did not, but yeah, it delivered what I wanted. But coming in at number 1, which actually is kind of a surprise for me, is Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, I expected to like this movie. I did not expect to love it. And I did not expect to love it even more the second time that I watched it. I knew I'd have a good time with it. I knew that they would get more right than they got wrong. At least I hoped so. It just kind of felt like a formula that it was going to be hard to miss with me, because I love the Deadpool movies. I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. That is my favorite live action performance of a comic book character. Some people say Tony Stark. Some people say Christian Bale's Batman. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, for me, is it. That is my favorite. And so despite the fact that I was very hesitant when they announced this, going, oh no, are you going to fuck up Logan? Logan was so perfect. What? No. Oh, I don't know. Despite all of that insecurity that I had about it, I started to get very excited and started to get very, very faithful that they were not going to do anything bad to it. And so when I saw the film, I loved what they did. I think that the Deadpool humor here is arguably the best of the three movies. You know, I said in my review when I first saw this that first film's still the best. I don't think the third film or the fourth film or the fifth film is ever going to beat the first one for me because it was such a fresh thing. And after I filmed that review, I rewatched the first two films before I went to go see this a second time and took my father to go see it for his birthday. And as of right now, it actually is my favorite Deadpool movie, Deadpool and Wolverine. I think it's just a little bit better than the first film. Some of the freshness of the first one kind of wore off on me when I rewatched it, and this one definitely got bigger laughs out of me. So just a bit of an asterisk to throw in there for those that saw my review. So what I loved about it, the Deadpool humor I thought was great. There's certainly some jokes that miss, but they're going for so many throughout the movie that the law of averages is just going to come into play at some point. I loved what they did with Hugh Jackman, all the different things that they do with his character to show quintessential Logan and not really taint or disrespect what that character has always been about, while also giving you very different and unique shades of the character that we have never gotten before. I thought was awesome. I think that Hugh Jackman brings a bit of a dramatic sense to the movie and a bit of a heart to the movie that inherently the Deadpool character can't necessarily deliver because he's so joke concentrated. And so that also made the movie feel a little bit more balanced than some of the other two. Like 2 tries to have a bit of that with a bit of a sentimental story with this kid Russell, and it never completely worked for me. In here, despite the amount of people saying that it doesn't have a heart, I disagree passionately with that. I think that the heart moments that you get in this movie are very effective. And even aside from just the Deadpool and Wolverine chemistry, which is certainly the best part of the film, and their multiple fights with each other and bickering back and forth and eventual friendship, all that stuff is great. They do a really good job with the multiverse stuff. And they do a really good job with their kind of surprise side characters. And I saw somebody say on Twitter, I can't remember the guy's name, I think he works for IGN. There was something that I was trying to convey in my review that he said better than I did. In my review, I said that, the cameos in the movie have a purpose in the film. It's not just about, hey, look who it is, and then they're out of the film. They're just there for a quick little moment of fan service. And what this guy said on Twitter, I'm paraphrasing, is that cameos and unreported or undisclosed side characters are not the same thing. Cameos is somebody coming in for a moment, like I just said, which a lot of them are. And, a lot of what you get in this film, or even more so with like Spider-Man No Way Home with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, those are not cameos. Those are side characters in the movie that are just not announced. They're unannounced major pieces of the character arcs and stories. And I absolutely subscribe to that. And so that was a much better way of putting it than I did in my review. So bravo to that person. But the way that they used their unannounced side characters in this film was awesome. I'm not going to name them here just in case you haven't seen the film, but the ones that we expected that were already announced or reported on or leaked, I think ended up being very good. And even knowing that they were coming didn't really affect how well they were using the story. And the few that we get that were absolute surprises, one in particular, which if you know some of my favorite movies of all time and you've seen Deadpool and Wolverine, you know which one I'm talking about, was so awesome. And that was the reason I took my dad to see it the second time, is because I saw this person walk on a screen, and immediately my first thought is, oh, I got to see Dad's reaction to this. And so I took him to see the movie. And so you have a scene where one character walks out and he leans over to me and starts saying something. And I was like, and I pointed to the screen to get him to like look back, because immediately afterwards, this character comes on screen, and then my dad lost it. He was like, oh, yeah. And even after the movie, that's what he couldn't stop talking about. So that was so fun and rewarding for me. But like I was saying with Twisters, Deadpool and Wolverine is one of those movies that is solely aiming to entertain the shit out of you. It's trying to make you laugh. It's trying to make you clap. It's trying to put a smile on your face. It's not a movie that's ever aiming to be anything more than that. And that's been the biggest frustration that I've seen with a lot of the criticism hailed at this by people I don't know, as well as people that I do know, where it's always valid to say things like the story could have been better, or, this is very convenient or whatever. But, there's something that people say about critics and about YouTubers or anybody that talks about movies that I honestly think is an issue sometimes. And that's where people sometimes are incapable of turning off the critic side of their brain and just enjoying a movie. Now, there are times where I feel like there are legit issues to be taken with a film that is aiming to entertain if things genuinely don't work here and there, or if there is big glaring issues. But I also think there's other times where a movie that's just never part of their objective. The Deadpool and Wolverine was never trying to tell this massively compelling or deep story that's going to advance the MCU or anything like that. That's just not the type of movie that it was. So having a story that is literally just there to propel the events in motion and get these characters together and set them up to have these big fan service moments and set them up to have these multiple fights and these big payoffs in the third act, to me, that's perfectly fine. If they found a way to tell a more compelling story while doing all that, bravo. That's even more things that you can praise about the movie. But I've been frustrated seeing the number and more so the level of disdain people have hailed at this movie because it didn't like move them on like some deep emotional or social level. And it's just like, it's a fucking Deadpool movie. That's not the objective. This is playing by the rules of a comedy. You have a plot that is there just to set up the bits. So if the bits work, then I don't really see what the issue is. So that's just something I kind of needed to get off my chest a little bit. I wish I almost did a spoiler review, but it would have just devolved in me talking about that the whole time. To me, just like with Twisters, this movie was pure, unadulterated entertainment, and I had a smile on my face from the first opening frame. That whole opening with Bye 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 is one of the best movie openings that I've seen in years, all throughout the movie to the end. And I just loved damn near everything that they did with it. I think that all of it was so funny, so smart, so refreshing. And seeing those two characters on screen, this is like the best version that I could have imagined as far as pure enjoyment goes. And I enjoyed it even more on second watch, which is a rarity for me. So I loved it. Comes in at number one. And it's going to be hard to beat that as far as just good old-fashioned entertainment in the year of 2024. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all my 2024 new releases, and here's a playlist of all of the monthly wrap-ups I've done so far this year. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.